Welcome back to the second half of my episode with Sam Larner. In this episode, you'll learn all about how sports organisations recruit players and also how organisations make it easy for players to bed into a team and how some don't. While we talk about sport, this is pretty much applicable to all walks of life where new people enter the team. Enjoy. There are areas where professional rugby is not actually that professional. I think recruitment is one of those areas. You've actually helped out a little bit of recruitment.
Yeah. So I've had different experiences. Some have been very interesting where maybe I've used some in-depth stats to suggest a particular player. Probably the most interesting one was with a club who asked me to find a second row, and I was really interested. It's the first time I'd ever been asked by a club to do something like this. Super interested, wanted to get a call to understand what they were looking for, and they went, probably 6'4", maybe South African. And I was thinking I could just go to a Southwest London with a net and find someone. It doesn't tell you anything about the player. So, and that was only a few years ago. So there's an element of that as well.
I've seen that a load of times as well. And someone would say, especially when I went to America, someone might ask for, do you know anyone that we need to sign a big block?
Yeah.
And that's it. It's like, well, anything more on that? Big block.
Yeah.
Are you serious? But one thing as well, and I'm interested to get your take on this, is with recruitment, across all sports actually, what you tend not to see very often is recruiting in groups or pairs.
Yeah.
Because say I want to sign a striker that scored X amount of goals. Again, it might be more like your stat there. Maybe we need XG. Maybe we'll come to that soon.
Yeah.
But what you should be looking at is why do they score their goals? Oh, well, this left winger gave them 12 assists. Maybe we should try and sign them together because the likelihood of that being successful is a lot higher. Take in rugby.
Yeah.
This fly half is really good, but only because this 12 that's with him is an unbelievable communicator. Maybe we should bring them both, or vice versa. You see it very rarely in rugby. And I think that's somewhere they could really make gains.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we don't do very well at rugby, which I guess is slightly aside from that, but is we don't really know how good teams are compared to one another. So obviously we've got the league tables, but what we don't know is how good is a Premiership side compared to the top 14 in France, or how good are the Pro D2 side compared to the URC, or how good is an MLR side compared to the Premiership. And you can speak to guys like yourself who've played in multiple leagues, and you can say, well, I reckon they're similar or one below the other. And so that can hold back recruitment because you see in the Championship, there's guys who've scored tries, who've been consistently highest try scorers year after year after year, who aren't getting selected for the Premiership, and they fit the age profile. They're still young. They've got a background. Maybe they were in under 20s teams in England, Ireland, whatever. And so they fit the profile, but they're not getting picked up. And you do want to kind of think, well, why is that? And I think a lot of it is down to they just don't know the comparison. They don't know how much 20 tries in the Championship is worth in the Premiership. So I think that's one area of it. And exactly like you say, pulling together different pairs. So you see this a lot in football where there might be a great striker who scores 20 goals. Next season, you go somewhere else and he scores 6 goals. And why is that? Is it because the team he's gone to is worse? Is it because he's not getting the service? Is it because people don't know how to play with him? So maybe he's a slow but big guy, and so he can't run in behind the defence. But they keep making him do that, and that's often something that gets lost.
Yeah, I think it's 100% right. Also, when you come to, you mentioned the comparison between leagues. I think, especially in the Premiership, there is probably a large lack of respect for the quality in the Championship.
Yeah.
Again, don't blame them for that because it is the Championship for a reason. But I remember when I was deciding to leave Wasps or not, I basically played one game at the start of my second season. I was rubbish. And after that, I was kind of like, okay, I'm not really playing here. I had a sit down with the 2 attack coaches. And I was like, okay, so what should I do? And they're like, well, you can go on loan. And I was like, all right, honest question here. If I go on loan and play really well, will it affect my selection? Honestly. And the coach, and fair play to him, he looked at me and went, no. I was like, fine, I won't go on loan. There's no point. I'll go to America. I'll go out, have a time enjoying travelling around and playing some new rugby. But there was no, realistically, if they really respected the Championship and you're playing well in it, that would affect. But they were honest with me, which I really appreciated. But when it comes to recruitment as well, we talk about the statistics, we talk about the player profile. But one thing that is huge there is you're not signing a skill set and the work ethic and this. You are, but that is a very small factor in what allows someone to play well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of how someone plays is based on how they feel. And you want people to feel happy, you want people to feel confident, you want people to feel clear on the plan. And I've seen it with teams. If you sign a player, especially if they've come from abroad or they've come with a family, they settle, they need to buy a house massively or rent a house, massively stressful experience. They have a family. Now, if that family isn't really integrating and doesn't know anyone, they're a bit miserable. Every time you go home, you're getting it in the ear, this, I'm not happy there, not happy there. That stresses you out. Then you might, because you're spending more time there, you're not spending as much time actually with the team you're trying to get to know. So you're not making these connections that make it easier to play. And that makes it a lot harder to play at this high skill set that you've set at the club where you're completely settled, you know everyone and all this. Now, some clubs go above and beyond to make that work. So they'll meet you at the airport. They'll take you. They'll have sorted your house for you. This is what. Here's your Wi-Fi. Here's your phone. Here's this. We've got this group where a few of the other wives who have come from other places have set up and want to get you in straight away. Your kids are going to go to this school. We'll help you out with that. We've signed up. We've done all this. They've taken away X amount of stress. So when you go and play, it's easier. Also, when they join the team, they make it really easy for you to get to know people.
Yeah.
For example, usually when you join a team, you walk into the lunchroom and you have to find somewhere to awkwardly sit. The normal thing to do is people come up to you. Hi, Sam, how's it going? Nice to meet you. I'm Ross. Let me know if I can help you with anything. Off I go. That's the normal expected thing. One club I went to, walk in, someone saw me. It was quite intimidating groups as well, a lot of internationals. I was like, okay, here we go. And one of the more senior players spots me and goes, oh, Ross, sit down and tell us your story. Pulls out a chair and they all sort of lean in to listen to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is quite nice. Now I've got lost even more stress about where to sit at lunch. I now feel like I know 5 people and they're asking me questions. Or they do things like this. And all of these things make a big difference for how quickly you integrate. I can think of a load of players that struggle with that. I'm going to keep going with this because there's another bit that latches on. With business, really good analysis of Wall Street analysts. It's actually in the 80s, but because they all live and work in the same area, there's less variables than in other jobs. So they all live and work, and if they move from firm to firm, they're only moving across the street. There was 80 firms, about I think it was 1,000 analysts, something like that. I'll find the real numbers.
Yeah.
But it was all about the portability of talent. So when you ask the analysts, how portable is your talent? They all said, completely portable. But they were all ranked by this magazine on all these factors, on how they were rated by buyers, etc. This, how they actually performed, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And on average, it would take the analysts 2.2 years to reach the level they were at the place they left.
Yeah.
And that is with fairly few variables. They didn't realise how many resources they used from their firm, how that helped them, all these things, the ease of, okay, I can get this quickly from this department, I need this information, blah, 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 blah. Took 2.2 years.
Yeah.
Now put that in sport. Again, if you're expecting someone to really perform at a high level in the first season, it's not going to happen. Average onboarding is 8 to 12 years, but as you see Wall Street analysts, 2.2 years. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And you need to be speeding that up as much as you can. If you're just letting someone arrive and sort their stuff out, you're slowing it down.
Yeah, I have a similar story actually when in 2019 I went to Tokyo for the World Cup and I was there for 7 weeks and I was writing analysis articles for the World Cup website and a totally new experience, never been out there before, and there was maybe 40 to 50 of us all from either the UK or a few Dutch people. And I'm not naturally gregarious, so I like talking to people, but I don't really like going up to people and kind of starting conversation. And I was sat next to this old kind of experienced Scottish journalist called Robert Malvin on the first day, and we were kind of getting these talks about what it was going to be like, all this kind of stuff. And then it was a lunch break, and I was thinking, I'm not really looking forward to this because this is going to be like, I have to try and make small talk, and if I don't make it now, it'll miss out. And I said to him, oh, look, I'm not very good at this. And I went and got a coffee, and when I came back, he brought people over to the table. And so he was like, he'd say, come to my table. And he was chatting with, and this is Sam. Sam's from up near Leeds, and he's doing this. And I must have met 9 or 10 people in that one experience. And I think you see that with and the effect was I was much happier. I wanted to give more to it. And so I had really great kind of 7 weeks there and basically work kind of more or less 6.5 days a week and all this kind of stuff. But it wouldn't have been possible without that initial start because you just think, well, I don't know anyone here. I don't really like it. I go in the office and I just put my headphones in and put my head down. And it completely changed because you go in and you do some of that, and then you get up and you chat to someone and all this kind of thing. And so I think we've all probably experienced similar things to that in working life. And it happens exactly the same in clubs, where you might spend, if you're signing someone, big name back row from France, say, 300 grand is about the going rate now for the Premiership. So if you sign someone like that and then you go, I'll just leave you to it. There's no point paying that amount of money for someone who is going to be unhappy and as you say, has to sort all that stuff out themselves. And even in football, where Kylian Mbappe, when he went from Monaco to Paris Saint-Germain, I think it was 180 million euros. And then there was no one there to do any of that. No one to rent a house. I mean, he could have. I'm sure he got some help, but the club didn't put anything on for them to help with that.
Yeah.
And that's very common in the Premier League. Should not have anyone, at the club as like an onboarding supervisor or whatever the job, whatever the title might be. And so, I think possibly due to things like FIFA and Football Manager and those games that we're quite familiar with, we often see athletes as just a bunch of stats.
Yeah.
And I think that's a risky thing that analysts and certainly stats people who aren't working with players. So I know I used to do this in the past before I started working with players, is that I would just see it as a stat. I see a player as he's produced 10 try equivalents in a season, he's played 1,000 minutes, he's made 400 tackles, whatever it might be. And you forget the fact that, maybe he's an English guy who was in the Championship and now he's got an offer in Pro D2 and it's the start of his career and he's excited about that, but actually he has to leave his girlfriend at home because she's got a job and he can't move her over because he can't survive them both on the wage he's getting. And that massively would impact you and would impact your happiness and all that kind of thing. And I think that often, it can happen in punditry as well. You watch a game and you just go, he was rubbish, or he was great, or whatever. And there's no sense that behind the scenes there's an actual human being. I do think that that's something where clubs can do a better job of. And I think possibly, you can probably tell me if this is right or not, I think you need to be, macho, you need to be the strongest team, you need to don't take a backward step. A lot of what gets missed in that is, humanity, I guess.
Yeah, the soft side that does make a difference, but it's harder to measure.
Yeah.
So clubs often will want to focus on things they can measure.
Yeah.
Now, how many times you speak to a new player before they onboard at a quick level is not something you measure.
Yeah.
Right, we've had 15 conversations with that new guy, which means you should probably be 30% onboarded, etc. Not everyone is going to be an Erling Haaland.
Yeah.
Who comes in. And equally, another stat on that Wall Street one is if you move from a firm with middling resources to one with high amount of resources, your performance time was shorter, so you were going to get better. But if you go down, it was longer. Yeah. So again, you've got to be thinking about who you are as a club. If you are at the moment, a Newcastle Falcons, onboarding should be huge because it's going to take longer anyway because they're going to have less resource than where they've come from if they've come in the Premiership. Yeah. In theory, but even Haaland, that is kind of unheard of. Really, you don't come in and score. How many did you score? 36 goals or something?
It's obscene, isn't it, really?
On football, I know you've read a few interesting things around how they view statistics there. Yeah. How much has it been taken up?
So I think that is a sport where it's eventually got through. So I would say we're starting to see managers use more advanced statistics in what they're talking about. So if you've not heard of XG, or expected goals, so essentially what it does is every shot has a potential outcome of how likely it will be to result in a goal. So a penalty, I think, is 0.76 XG. So there's a 76% chance that will result in a goal. Obviously, a shot from that Beckham shot against, was it Wimbledon where he scores from his own half? Yeah. Probably a 0.01 XG. So what you can do with that information is a couple of things. So first of all, you can look at how the underlying performance. So let's say a team has an XG of 4, but actually they've only scored 1 goal. That is usually a result of luck. So they're producing the expectations, they're producing the chances, but they're not actually finishing the goals. And interestingly, there's actually no kind of sign or no evidence in the data that, say, Erling Haaland has got a better XG than someone else, so is more successful at converting the goals than someone else. He just has more chances. He puts himself in the right position more often, similar to the 2020 entries in rugby. So I think teams are starting to pull that data out and starting to use that because they use it a lot in recruitment. So, for example, you can see how highly ranked clubs are against one another. So, if you look at the Dutch division, for example, it's ranked a lot lower generally than the French division. But actually, the top 2 or 3 teams in the Dutch division, so Ajax, Feyenoord, those lot, are about as good as the top 2 or 3 in the French league.
Right.
So actually, if you're looking for the cheap talent, you'd be better off going to the top teams in the Dutch leagues than the top teams in the French leagues, where there's a massive market because it's got a history of generating top talent. But I think with football, it's always a slow progress where you start off with, I guess people like me will start writing about it for niche audiences, and then it will start be written about for more broader audiences, and then it'll get on TV, and then you'll hear clubs using it. But the hidden thing is that clubs probably were using it just before the niche audiences were aware of it.
Yeah, that is interesting. You do sometimes need trailblazers to do it. Saracens, as an example in rugby, I would say, maybe I'm wrong, but they were the first ones to really go all in on the kicking exits. Now, if you don't do that, you're just going to lose because you're giving loads more opportunity to do. So you have to. So some people change the game. I know the NFL are quite statistical, especially so again, talk about seasonal stats. They know how many yards they need to get to win, make the playoffs. So they think, so that then changes things from what fans see as great things, which is probably a real long pass or a massive long run.
Yeah.
You actually want 11 yards, or maybe you want 5 every time or 2 every time.
Yeah.
So they look at yards. So what gets yards? That's kind of like an on-base percentage.
Yeah.
Who gets yards?
Yeah.
But again, I remember thinking there were some locks in rugby that I used to think were unbelievable because they made one big line break. And I just think that's a great lock. Actually, you don't really bring a lock in for line breaks, but fans may see that.
Well, I've got a story about a lock who made a line break. So there was a guy...
A rare tale.
Very rare tale. There was a guy who was playing in Wales. He was, I think he was Tongan, and he wasn't getting much game time. He wasn't... they were probably going to release him at the end of the season. I think he was on £5,000 a month. So a decent wage, but not nowhere near kind of the top of the pile. And he went and played a game against a French club in Europe. And I think the Welsh team were out of it. And so it was kind of a nothingy game. But he made a sidestep someone, made a line break, and they offloaded for the try. And about a month later, the French club got in contact with his agent and said, we like this guy. We'd like to hire them. And the agent was like, obviously, I'm not going to dissuade you, but I do want to keep this relationship. And I just think you should be aware that have a look at the rest of his season.
The agent said that?
Yeah, the agent said that, yeah.
God.
Just make sure you're aware of what's going on. And they came back a week later and went, we've looked, we want him. And they signed him for $15,000 a month, so 3 times his salary. And he was gone within a year. So they signed him for a 3-year contract.
Yeah.
And he was gone within a year. So he's elsewhere. I think he's reached the end of that contract now. So he got a whole 3-year deal, and he was paid to play elsewhere after that first year, off the basis of one move in a match. It didn't mean anything.
It is mental, isn't it?
It is.
But it does, people can say they don't react to it. I know I do. If I see someone that does a really great line break, but I know the other wing is probably better.
Yeah.
I'm like, mate, he has the potential to do that. And as a coach, when you're under pressure, someone that can do that even once is someone you want in the team.
Yeah.
And I think that's always where stats are going to have this fight against perception, which is interesting. I think the cricket example is very interesting as well, because, again, that's a more closed sport, which means stats and game theory can apply more. For example, the Ashes in, was it 2019?
Yeah.
The top of off?
Yeah.
I think that may have been even earlier than that, but they just realised, okay, over a series, if we bowl X% at top of off, we are most likely to keep them under 280 every game or something like that. I'm not going to butcher the stat, but again, it's like, well, that's quite dull.
Yeah.
But that's what won us a series.
Yeah, I think stuff like that is fascinating, because obviously we see it with baseball, where the basics of baseball is every now and then you get a ball that's unplayable. So you may as well be on 50 rather than on 10, because the ball's coming. It's coming down the track. You may as well be on a higher score when that happens. And if you're getting to that high score, it's giving you a bit more risk. All you've got to do is balance Where would I be at if I didn't do this versus where am I at having done this? And I think this is a fascinating thing that we don't think about enough. So, if I recruit a player for the team, I know how well that player does, and I can consider them a flop or I can consider them a success, but I can tell how well they've done. But what if I actually have 3 players I wanted to recruit? And so I had player A who joined, I had player B and player C who didn't. I can actually look at how well they've done over the 2 seasons or 3 seasons of this contract. And at the end, I can say, I made a mistake because player B was actually better. He's been better over that time period. And one of the challenges is there's a huge amount of bits that go into that. So maybe player B went to a worse team, and so we need to find a stat that tells us how good he is independent of the team. So all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, what we don't do enough of in sport and business is go, okay, this is a decision I made, but let's also monitor the decisions I didn't make. And that's often what you're seeing in, for example, with baseball, but also in the NFL. So going for it on 4th is a big thing in the NFL, high risk. And what will happen is the commentators will watch it and go, yeah, that worked, that's good. That didn't work, that's not good. And I was watching a game on Sunday, actually, and a commentator, they went for it on 4th, and the commentator went, it didn't work out. And he said, still a fan of going for it there? I was like, I mean, it's completely irrelevant whether it works or not, because you can't just take the outcome and say that outcome was good, therefore it was successful. The outcome was bad, therefore it was unsuccessful, without also kind of measuring what would have happened if they didn't do it. What is the outcome if we just punted the ball away or went for the field goal, whatever it might be. And I think that's what we see a lot of in cricket, really, is that we know what happened, and so we can say we shouldn't have done that because the outcome was bad. But actually what we don't do is measure the other stuff, because England weren't very good at cricket before baseball, so it's not as if it's a massive improvement.
I think I did again a while ago. I looked at the win rate before baseball.
Yeah,
it was like the 24 tests before and the 24 tests after, and I think it went from something like 29% wins to 60.
That sounds about right. Yeah,
you look at that and you go, well, that is a serious difference. That's got statistical significance there. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But again, baseball lives and dies by how you treat mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, the second you get rid of someone for getting it wrong and doing what you ask them to do, everyone goes, can't really do this anymore.
Yeah.
So that's the impressive thing for me, is what is your risk tolerance around this?
Yeah.
And expected value as well.
Yeah.
So again, if you go into game theory or anything like this, go into gambling, expected value becomes a huge thing. Like, this may seem irrational to you right now, but expected value of doing this is huge.
Yeah.
And the baseball one I really like is the pitcher. So again, with penalty shootouts, if you're the initiator, I'm the thrower in baseball, I'm the bowler in cricket, I'm the penalty taker in football, I have the most control over this situation. So I'm the initiator. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is strategize, even though it's the most tempting thing to do, is to, I think he's in a dive left, so I dive right, or he's in every game, he usually dives this way. Never do that, because you allow them something to follow.
Yeah.
Whereas if they didn't have that, you have an advantage. So really, you should leave up to chance. And there's a pitcher in baseball, an unbelievable record, and no one could really figure out what he's done. So what are your options? Fastball, slow ball, curveball, knuckleball.
Yeah.
There aren't that many options. And what he was doing, no one could figure out. A lot of people you could figure out, well, toward the end where they need to get you out, that's when they use their fastball. So now you've got something to latch onto. He would look at the clock and he'd pick if the second was in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, and that's where he would throw fast load. And no one knew he was doing this, so you'd just be looking around. He's like, okay, it's a knuckleball. And you can't figure that out unless you know. If you know, it becomes very easy. But again, he's leaving it to chance, which puts it all in his favour. So as a batsman, you're like, is he prepared for me? If he's prepared for me, he knows I'm not good on slow ball, so he's probably going to chuck a slow ball. Now, every now and then, it will work out against you.
Yeah.
But over a long time, expected value, it's going to really help you.
Yeah, so I had an interesting discussion similar to this actually at the club I'm coaching at, where I guess there's 2 ways of defending in rugby. You can either stay tight around the ball, defend the immediate threat, but you risk being run around on the outside, or what is quite common at grassroots is you more or less number up, so you each mark a man. And I'm not really in favour of that second approach, because you end up with a winger who's just in acres of space and doesn't know if they're going to step in or step out. So I say this, and I say I prefer this to defend tight, and if they put 4 passes together and run round us, then fine, they've done a good job. But I don't want us to be broken through the middle. And when I said this to a new guy who's playing on the wing, he went, I just want to go back to that because I'm worried about being run around on the outside. And I realised that he's basing this purely on he has done something and it's not worked. Whereas if he does nothing, if he just defends as he always has, if we get beaten on the inside every single time, he is not to blame. No one is looking at the winger and going, you messed up there.
It's risk aversion.
Risk aversion, exactly. Whereas if he steps in and then he gets beaten on the outside, everyone knows it's his man that he's allowed to go down the outside. And you see this in all sport where if you do something, if you proactively do something like baseball, then you put yourself on a pedestal to be kind of shot at. If you do nothing, if you lose, 16, if you lose whatever it was, 70% of your games before that, then that's okay. No one wants that, but you've not actually proactively done something different. I think that's a really interesting part of this is that with stats and data, we can tell you, hopefully, here's what you should do, but you can't make you do it. And also a lot of people don't buy into that. They don't buy into that kind of, okay, the stats telling me this, so either I'll do it half-heartedly or I won't do it at all because I might look a bit silly. And that risk aversion is a killer. Yeah,
that is very interesting. And even with rugby, I can tell you a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, if the outside centre of the wing gets hung out to dry, they have literally been hung out to dry. It's very rarely their fault. They've had to make decisions when they're under duress. I had a defence coach once. Who was it? I think it was Brad Davis. When I went back to London Irish, and he said, you need to be slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Because the second you become comfortable, due to the nature of the pitch, that means someone else has to be slightly more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you all want to be just at the edge of your comfort, and that means we're all in the same boat. Now, the more comfortable you feel, the less comfortable someone else has to feel.
Yeah.
And when I started thinking about that, I was like, that's so true.
Yeah.
Because everyone on the inside is looking after their own skin, and it means someone is getting hung out to dry somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so that was the nature. And I remember thinking that's brilliant. I've not thought about it like that.
Out of interest, in your experiences in rugby, did you ever have a situation where, how do you create that environment in a team where the lock is willing to potentially look silly to make you not look silly on the outside? Because that seems like something that, we hear about this, we're all in this together, we're all a team. But actually, there's an overriding kind of idea that I don't want to be the one to mess up. And so that must be very hard, even at a professional level, to create that.
Yeah, I don't think you ever really get rid of it. At the end of the day, people don't want to be blamed. And the more you blame someone as a coach, the more people don't want to be blamed and will shift the blame. So what you don't want in a feedback session is for people to go, well, it wasn't me because they weren't flat enough. Because also that's not helpful because you're focusing on what other people need to do, not what you do. So you're capping your own performance. But essentially, I think it's the way you run your incentives and your feedbacks. If something goes wrong on the outside and you don't blame the winger and you go, well, actually, why are you so tight in the middle here?
Yeah.
Suddenly they go, okay, I was looking after myself there, but I now know I'm going to be called out for doing it. I used to do it. If I'm bad at something, I actually didn't like exposing that I was bad at it. Therefore, I'm never working on it.
Yeah.
Especially training. So I was an okay tackler, but being a taller guy in the wide channels, I used to hate the idea of being stepped. So I'd always try and risk manage that because I thought, well, if I go at them hard and they've got quick feedback, I'm gone and I look like an idiot.
Yeah.
So I used to not actually like training. I just took the safe option. So I never got better at it until toward the end of my career, I started realising sort of sharpening up a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think coaches have to try and encourage that without doing it wrong too much. I had a great guy, a human brain researcher, he's 300 published articles called Vince Walsh, worked with a lot of sports teams as well. He said one thing people really get wrong is their embracement of failure.
Yeah.
So they think, if you're failing all the time, that's really good. He's like, it's actually really not because you're training your brain to spot bad cues. You want to be in that 90-10, 80-20 range, getting it right 90% of the time and wrong 10%.
Yeah.
If you're 100%, you're not getting anything wrong, so you're not pushing.
Yeah.
But if you're getting it wrong 50% of the time, you're training getting it wrong. And he said that's really bad when it comes to learning. And a lot of teams I was at, I used to hear stories of some players who would be running through your moves and the ball would come slightly too low for them and they just kick it back and say, do it again.
Yeah.
And if that had happened to a team I was at, I think I'd be like, what the He's just kicked back. We're trying to run through our moves, just catch it and move on.
Yeah.
But I only want the best.
Yeah.
If we're not training the best, then we're not doing it because we're accepting.
It's fascinating because when you talk about that example, I was thinking, so I used to play fly half and I was a terrible tackler. Just awful, physically awful, and just not very kind of confident doing it. And yet, every scrum, every line out, I would stand on that channel where they run the biggest leg down. And I remember about 2 seasons in thinking, why am I doing this? Because I've got a good centre tackler, I've got another good centre outside, our fullback's a good tackler. Why don't I just switch with them? Because the only reason I'm doing this is just pride. Like, I don't want to put my hand up and go, look, I can't tackle. Yeah. I'll move outside and I can maybe make a bit of those scrag tackle on the outside centre or something. And then you start to suggest that to kind of players lower down the levels. And it's like rocket science. It's like it completely blown their mind that you could do this. You don't have to stay 10, 12, 13 in all these situations. And even at the elite level, you still see guys like Finn Smith, for example, in Northampton. He made some obscene amount of tackles last year. I think he's third highest tackler in the Premiership this season. So he's a very good tackler, very, very unlike me. But is that the best use of his resources? Just making him tackles?
It's like a quarterback in football, right? They slide off the pitch. They don't try and get an extra couple of yards for pride. They go, no, I need to look after myself. So do you need to actually protect those guys that you need? So again, it's a seasonal view, but also with that in the game. So I know George Ford often defends in the channel, or they move people around. Now, in a one-off game works seasonally. Does it work? Well, if teams start realising, well, we can actually now send our big boys down that channel. Yeah. Whereas at 10, you can actually have your tail gunner sort of come, sometimes anyway, or you put them in the backfield. Okay, well, bombs are going up. Yeah. So is it a game or is it seasonal? What's your game? So in a quarterfinal or semi-final, you need to do it. But actually throughout the season, you probably need to work on getting that plugged. Again, depends who the player is. If they're genuinely just never going to be able to tackle people. That said, I'm pretty sure George Ford has quite a high tackle percentage.
He is. He's got a much better tackler than people give him credit for.
Yeah, obviously not dominant tackles, but he's not
missing them.
He's not missing them, which is actually, I bet he'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, and I think also, so that was one of the interesting ones about dominant tackle. So dominant tackle, obviously, we think of as great, smashing them back. You get, I'm pretty sure this is true, you get more turnovers off kind of soft tackles where you've just ridden them backwards and someone can get it over the top. Yeah.
Well, they use that as tactics now as well, which I always think is incredible when my teams manage to do it. Well, that's just brilliant. Yeah. Where you're trying to get the ball at the end of the game and they do this because the other team you can't go straight to ground. That's a penalty. So you have to take the contact, but they know what you're trying to do. So it's this real odd game of chicken. Yeah. And then you drag them through, bang, they get on it. But it's interesting. I think there is an area where game theory can come into rugby, not across a season, but in a game. Yeah. Do you have any feelings on that?
Yeah, so I do think there's certain areas where you can really take advantage of what oppositions do poorly. So I think there's a general tendency that teams have is we don't look at the opposition, we just want to be the best at what we do, and we're going to play this way, whether it's the best team or the worst team, we're just going to play our way because that's how we do it. And there's a real pride in this is our way of playing and we don't want to deviate from it. But you can play certain teams. So Bristol Bears would be a good example where they like to attack a lot from anywhere. And it's very high risk. And teams will generally defend more or less the same against them as they would against Leicester, who like to kick from pretty much everywhere. And you see Bristol will get a lot of mileage by taking that approach because it's something different. In fact, in cricket, you saw it with Lasith Malinga, the Sri Lankan player who would bowl with a very odd arm angle. Same in baseball where people bowl under the arm. And, all this kind of stuff. And it's just something different. And so Bristol get a lot of mileage just by being different. And I think that what you need to get better at, or what teams need to get better at, is understanding each game. There might not be a wholesale change, but it might be kind of a horses for courses thing. Maybe we don't pick this player because in this situation it's going to be better. So Leicester, for example, if Bristol play Leicester, they've got Faye Stewart, fantastic under the high ball, but do they play him in that game where there's not going to be very many high balls? Bristol will kick less than any other team. Do you instead play three wingers and go for the pace and try and attack those few a few high balls or a few kicks that might come. Do you? Potential other option is, do you drop the fullback altogether and play two scrum halves and play the other side of the pitch?
See, that's what I think is brilliant, because I definitely don't think so. The area I push back on is where I've seen coaches that try and change game plans for different. I think that's bad, because you actually do want to get really good at what you do, as opposed to trying to learn a new thing each week. It's tempting, but selecting players based on people who, again, what comes into it? Pride comes into it. But this is our main player, we have to start them. But they put loads of bombs on, and that's actually, he's not as strong at that. So when you recruit, are you recruiting difference? So that's the difference. I think if you go, we need to change our game plan every week, that's where you get trouble, because you can't get really good at that game plan, i.e. someone rushes you, you want to play from deeper and play little chips and crossfields to exploit that. Try and do that under pressure 1 week doesn't work. And I've seen coaches try and do that. It's tempting because you see it, but you need to be good at your game plan. But if you have players that can switch in that are good at that game, you should be able to do that.
Yeah.
And then you also have less players who are getting tired and sappy and toxic on the edge because they're never playing. So I think that's the key, is having players that can swap in. But again, pride comes into it.
Yeah.
That's my starting player. I want to play, and you'll get offended if I take him off this game. That's where your culture and your squad comes in.
I think that's also where fans potentially have a negative impact, is that they want to see a certain player, and if he's dropped, there will be a bunch of people who, and they'll be on Twitter the next day saying he shouldn't be dropped, the coach is rubbish. And suddenly you're in a situation where people pretend they don't listen to that stuff, but we all know that they do.
Yeah.
And so the coaches wakes up on Sunday, maybe he's won the game with his two massive fullbacks who were taking the high balls, and suddenly all that joy is kind of like, oh, okay, well, now everyone thinks that my quick fullback's rubbish, or that I've lost the plot, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And we saw that with England when they put Ellis Gage in the backfield to run a game. Was it France, I think, where they were just running those deep balls back, but with a massive, powerful forward. And it seemed to be quite successful, but Eddie Jones was then criticised for, well, actually it's because the scrum wasn't as good because Gage was tired from running those balls back. And so it's very hard to win as soon as you move away from what you're doing. And I agree with you. I think game plans, you need to have an overall idea of this is who we are and this is what we do. And I don't think you can go, well, we're playing this team, we do this thing, we're playing that team, we do that thing. So I think there needs to be an overall culture of who we are. But I do think that there's, as you say, there's beneficial little moments that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. I think Eddie Jones is a great example of someone who was quite good at that. But people are so staunch and partisan when it comes to certain coaches like Eddie Jones. If you don't like Eddie Jones, anything Eddie Jones does is bad. But there's a lot of casual ambiguity. He did some genius things. I remember there's one game against France where they just kicked every single ball. Yeah. And French couldn't deal with it. There was one player that said, he was an England player, if Eddie Jones had come to the club, he'd leave the club. It's like, it's fine, international, but it is exhausting. Yeah. If he was all there, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, he did amazing things for Japan. Like he basically revolutionised a way of playing the game. And he's back there now doing something similar. That very quick-paced game that beat South Africa in 2015, that was more or less unheard of. And so I think he provided a lot, but I can imagine that the environment is hellish.
Intense.
Yeah.
Well, and so there's one area that I think, okay, having read a bit about game theory and understanding this, where could it actually be applied in rugby? And the area for me is not seasonal but situational. So in one game, and only really quarter semi-finals, where you're going to be a bit more, how do we win this game, as opposed to how do we win across the season? But whenever you're prepping for one of these big games, and I wish I'd been involved in more, but sadly, there we are. But what you do is you really review the other team to try and find chinks in the armour. Yeah. Now, the problem is they are also doing that. So they're playing for you as you're playing for them most of the time. Regardless of what they say, we're just going to stick to our game. Bullshit. You've reviewed a few things. So what you really need to do early on in the game is find out what they're trying to do. Yeah. So in my opinion, what you should do is for the first 10 minutes, just give them the ball. Just kick the hell out of it. Give them the ball and find out. Because yes, you're going to be at a negative for the first 10 minutes because you give them the ball. They need the ball, you need territory, etc. But if you can find out what they're doing in the first 10, are they bringing a bit more line speed? Are they going high? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? It has a few advantages. Number one, they think that's your game plan. Yeah. They think they're just kicking us the ball. You're only doing it for 10 minutes. and you're really observing, being hyper vigilant, everyone knows this, you're on the same page. First 10 minutes, we're finding out. They now think they're just kicking us the ball. So that's one thing that's to your advantage. Now, the first time you get to properly get together again is half time.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is after 10 minutes, bring the team in. We've all been looking for certain things. Now we know it. Okay. So now for the next 30, we're going to have an advantage because we've now assessed what they're doing and we can launch our plan accordingly. We know the contingencies, we plan for this. And those next 30, the other thing is what you really want to do, because you've planned your moves based on what they normally do.
Yeah.
Now, the first 10 minutes of the game are not normal because everyone's hyper vigilant. So you really want to run those special plays back end of the first half, start the second half, or as the game wears on.
Yeah.
Because that's when it's going to be most useful, because that's where you're going to be slightly less vigilant and more into the game. But what everyone does is, first few plays, what are we going to run? I wouldn't bother. I'd wait.
Yeah.
You'll catch them on it when they're doing their normal thing. So for me, how do you game theory that that's the area I think you could do it?
Yeah, I agree. So there's a similar example to that. So La Rochelle, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, when they reached a Champions Cup final. So in the line out, they've got an enormous Australian second row, back row, Will Skelton, who they didn't use at all as a jumper at the line out. In fact, they didn't use him in the line out much. Gets to the final and he's used more than any other team. More than any other player, for La Rochelle. So clearly they knew he could do it. And I reckon they were just saving him back for that final to then go, okay, they've never seen him before. He's too big to lift. We never going to use him. And then bang, now we're using him. And now they're thinking, okay, hang on, this is completely different. And one of the things that you could do is you could use your bench a little bit. So obviously, as we see in South Africa, they can have 7-1 split, or maybe you can flip it down, you have more backs on the bench, or maybe you could even put a forward in the backs for, say, the last half an hour, where you anticipate having having the lead, and what you want to do is just run crash balls through the middle. Or you've got the lead, you don't expect they're going to kick, so he's not going to be as isolated, or you're just going to play him as essentially a ninth forward, and you're just going to move him down the pitch. All that kind of stuff is you can use your bench in any way that you want, and we've seen people like Ida Sveya, like James Davis for the Scarlets in the past, who could operate both in the forwards and in the backs, and that gives you so much flexibility to do things like that. So I do anticipate we'll see things like that, where maybe you bring on a team in the second half who have trained a particular move, and so 60 minutes comes and you switch in your fullback, your centre, a scrum half, whatever, and they've got a particular move that they've specifically been working on.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how much it increases. I think it will come in more and more, as I would say in general rugby, there's less space because defenders are now better and more mobile than you watch a game in the 70s or something like this, and it's just a free-for-all. It looks great to watch, to be fair.
Yeah.
But the players are not as skilled as you'd imagine with 20, 30 years of professionalism now involved. It's going to get to that point. But I think if you had to rank these sports and which have the most statistical analysis, let's assume F1's number one. Yeah. Because it can't not be, really.
Yeah.
Where do you think rugby actually ranks at the moment?
I'd say it's behind all the American sports. I'd say it's behind football, behind cricket. I think there's a lot of stuff in netball, so it's probably behind netball in that regard. I would put it it's low down. There's probably 15 or so teams in there. One of the things is, if you're the analyst in rugby, you don't get paid anything, really. I mean, the money is terrible.
It's a joke. I used to actually, my first year at Irish, one of the analysts living with us, and I'm pretty sure he was getting paid something like $5,000 a year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there was another analyst being paid $2,500, who was a junior one. So you have to work in the pub at night, and also they have the most workload.
Yeah.
They're constantly working. They have to stay up right after the game till 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, coding, and have it in. And because I guess a lot of people want to do the job, it's quite an attractive thing to be in sport. Like if you want to go and get in sport, being an analyst is quite, I'm informing the game plan. No, you're not.
Yeah.
Because the coaches don't listen to you half the time.
Well, exactly, yes. I mean, I've a bunch of analysts who, some of them work with amazing coaches who listen to what they say. They have a massive input. Some of them have even gone on to coach. Some, you're doing all this work. I know one guy over in France who was doing all this work and then was submitting it in, and no one was doing anything with it.
Yeah.
So and he couldn't not do it because then they'd notice and he'd get sacked.
Yeah.
So it was just a completely pointless exercise, really, of spending hours, 50, 60 hours a week doing this stuff. Something I've been offered in the past, and I was really tempted. And then you look at it and you think, well, I can earn 3 times what the analyst earns, and I have a life, and I get to do the rugby stuff on the side. It's very unappealing.
Yeah, and you are right. There are some, I don't know, Rich Whiffin, who was London Irish, came in as an analyst and then became the backs coach.
Yeah.
And now works
Under
20s Wales. Yeah. So, I think if you have a coach that is willing to listen, you can be really influential.
I think that's possibly changing, just because we're now in the era of coaches who themselves who are coaching having played entirely in a professional era.
Yeah, true.
So maybe like Vernon O'Gara, Bernard Jackman, he didn't play entirely in the professional era, I don't think, but he was he's massive into analysis. He did a lot of stuff when he was in Grenoble where it was basically unheard of in France at that time to do any analysis, and he was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think there's a few people who, and we might start to see more of it, but even amongst guys who were professional, even some of the players, their level of interest in analysis is not that high. And so I think that's always going to hold it back, maybe for 5 or 10 years. And I think there's a lot of people can learn about how you take a lot of information, a whole season's worth of information, and pass it down into something very small. And that's what I would recommend if people are out there who are thinking of being analysts or want to go into that role, is that actually the soft skills, how you speak to people, how you present that data, is probably more important than how good you are at coding. There's basic skill levels, but actually you need to be able to, for the long-term career, you need to be able to pass that information on. Otherwise, it's just no real point doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've gone there for quite a while, actually. It's about 1:40. It's a good stint. Mate, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you for travelling down. Mate, fini. So there we have it. I hope you really enjoyed both interviews with Sam Larner. And again, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Have a good one. Bye-bye.